Welcome everyone to another installment of LISI's News, Views, and To-Dos, where we talk to legal industry professionals about what is going on in their world, how they see the industry changing, their opinions about those changes, and lastly, their advice for our audience. Today, I am so excited to talk to Jim Jarrell, the Director of Marketing from McCarthy, Leavitt, Crystal, and Liffman. Thank you so much for being on, Jim.
Well, thanks for having me, Taryn. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you and share whatever it is I know, which could be nothing or everything.
I'm sure it's going to be very insightful. I have known Jim for a number of years, starting when we were both involved in LMA Midwest. Jim left for the East Coast. I left legal marketing for a little bit, and I was really excited last, I think it was fall, when our paths crossed again in my current role with LISI and his role with a firm on the East Coast. So without further ado, let's get on with the program. So our first question in this session is, what news would you like to share?
Well, I guess, in terms of news for me and my career is that I have moved to a new firm, which, if you're keeping tally, is something like the 208th firm in my career. No, I'm just kidding.
Hit all the Law 200 firms.
Right, somewhere along the line. But anyway, no, seriously, I about 4 months ago made the decision that it was time for me to move on from where I was at, and was really looking for an opportunity that would put me a little closer to home, where the parental units are as they're starting to age a little bit. And they spend their time partially in down south and then up in the Ohio market, which is where I now am. So I took this great opportunity with this smaller, sort of mid-size, but really on the small end of mid-size regional firm in the Cleveland market, McCarthy Leavitt, to help them figure out how they're going to grow over the next, however many years. And I've been there since March 1st. It's been a really exciting and interesting transition for me. And yeah, I'm right now I'm feeling super positive about it and very excited. It's a firm that is poised to do a lot of great things, and that's what really makes it exciting for me.
Are you excited to be back in the Midwest after what, probably 8 to 10 years on the East Coast?
Yeah, it's been 8 years since 2013. I had mixed feelings about it because the landscape of this area, not just Cleveland, but, like LMA Midwest, it used to be like LMA Ohio was where I started in Legal Marketing Association, right? Back before we were regionalized. And it's completely different. Like of course, there are faces that I recognize because Ohio's got a lot of really great legacy firms like Benish and Porter Wright and those, Taft is another big firm from the Ohio market. So I recognize all those people and their firms, but the true landscape of what makes up this region has been, it's completely foreign and different to me. In a way that's kind of scary, and I had mixed feelings about it. But you know what? I'm not a terribly shy guy, so I also look forward to the opportunity to reintroduce myself to the people of the Ohio market. And I think it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. I was poised to be president of the Northeast region beginning next year. In 2022, before I moved, when I sort of announced my move and had this conversation with LMA HQ, we sort of came to this conclusion that it really made more sense for me to be in the Midwest region. And, as much as I miss all my peeps back on the East Coast, I totally agree with them. So it's going to be exciting. It'll be cool. There's a lot of interesting opportunity for people who cross regions like that to to offer their perspective based on the regional tendencies and trends that they've been seeing where they work. So I'm looking forward to having a lot of those discussions with my colleagues here in the Midwest.
Yeah, and I'm obviously partial to LMA Midwest, having served on the board here, and I, like you, I recognize a lot of people now that I'm back in LMA Midwest, but there's a bunch of new faces that I don't know as well, or people that I knew in passing because they were just getting involved when I was ending my involvement with LMA. And so I see that as a sign of progress, that we have new faces and old faces. Good to see some additional people involved. And I agree with you, working with a firm that has a lot of East Coast clients, it is interesting for me to bring my experience being in the Midwest to those projects and to those meetings, because it is a little bit different. And I feel like we all have a lot that we can learn from each other about
Absolutely.
practices that might be adopted here that maybe haven't been adopted on the East Coast, or vice versa, to kind of bring that together for, you know, a greater whole. And I think as we're all working remotely, you know, especially the last year, but even leading up to that, that gives us even more ability to have those cross-regional conversations with people that previously maybe you talked to once or twice when you saw them in person, or maybe even you're on a phone call, but Zoom calls weren't nearly as popular before a year ago, or definitely
Right.
2 years ago. And it was always kind of hard to have that same connection with people when you're just one of 10 people on a call.
Yeah, it is different in that you're kind of hitting it right on the head there, that despite the global pandemic, the forces that are sort of forcing us together virtually have been, you know, a benefit to some of those cross communication issues that maybe we were taking for granted in the past. But I think it's great that, I think also that, you know, it's evidence that we know what we're talking about when we say to our firms, it's time to talk about succession planning, because we've lived through it. As you mentioned, you know, there's new faces in our professional association that you and I wouldn't have, you know, don't recognize from 5-10 years ago, right? And that's a terrific thing. That's something we should be very proud of, and it speaks a lot to our ability to see forward and make the kind of adjustments that we need to do in our leadership pipeline, in the way that we're attracting new members, how we're adding value to the community, so on and so forth. I think it's very important, and something we should be very proud of.
Well, and I think it's also a benefit to us just to know people of a variety of ages. You know, when we talk about mentoring, which is a huge benefit of LMA, whether it's formal or informal mentoring, knowing people who have more experience than you and can say, oh, I've been there before. Like, let's talk about that and see if we can come up with a solution for you. Or, you know, knowing people who are younger than you who can say, oh, well, you know, I grew up in a different way that you did. And like here, I'm thinking a lot of times, you know, maybe technology or something, you know, this would be a way that we could approach that solution, but always having a group of people that you can connect with, whether it's something you need, whether it's something your firm needs, whether it's something that a colleague or a peer needs. You can say, oh, I have the person for you. Just, you know, let me get their information. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Totally.
Well, I'm going to move on to our next question. And having known you for many years, I know you will have an opinion on this, but what do you see changing in the legal industry, and what do you think the impact will be?
What do I see changing in the legal industry? I think we're going to see increased consolidation of firms, especially at the ends of the AmLaw 200 spectrum. I think that's only natural given the state of the economy and where we are as firms. When you look at the fact that as the American lawyer has been beating into us over the last few months about the list from last year, there were only, what was it, 9-10 firms, maybe it was 12, I can't remember the exact number, that had more than, you know, that had a double-digit increase in profitability from 1 year to the next, from 19 to 20. That's astonishing when you think about the fact that they measure that result, that metric for so many firms,
Mm-hmm. And
that
for a
they come
lot of
out with this.
businesses, that's par for the course. Like that's
It is, it
fair,
is.
that's
So,
minimal entry.
so to think about law firms that so many of us, and I know this because, as a leader in my firm last year, I was constantly, staying in contact with my colleagues at other firms because I wanted to make sure that, what are we doing, what others are doing, are we being, obtuse to something? And because it's really important to take the temperature of your community before you, take action like that. It's hard sometimes to slow the attorneys down to make that connection, right? But
Yes.
it is important. But what really struck me was so many of us were frightened and fearful that this was going to be the end of the world. We didn't know whether clients were going to continue paying their bills. Now, for a huge segment of the AmLaw 200 and even outside of it, that was absolutely, the reality of the past year, that clients had trouble paying bills. And to some extent, my former firm may have, had some of that, but what we managed to take advantage of was what was going on inside the pandemic that was affecting these businesses, to make sure that we were a resource that they could count on for that. And that sort of supplemented whatever we weren't, getting. But and I think that may be where a lot of firms have missed the boat. And because of that, there's this very large pool of firms that are struggling economically, with this much smaller pool of firms that are in a really great position. And that gap that exists between the two, I think, is going to continue to grow over the next 2 to 5 years. And I think because of that, you're going to see consolidation, because the further away that smaller gap or that smaller group of firms gets from the bigger group of firms, it's going to be harder for those partners in those firms to even believe that they can catch up. So the best way for them to do that is going to be to merge. So I think you're going to see a natural tendency toward consolidation and merger activity. There's been a little bit of it in the news early this year, but I think it's, not that I have a crystal ball that's telling me that. I just have a hunch. It just feels like that's the direction this is going.
And do you think that'll create additional opportunities for firms outside the AmLaw 200, such as your firm? Or do you think
I think the more flexible firms are to be able to pivot, and I've started to hate that word a little bit, but it is really what it is, right? You've got to be able to shift quickly to where the market is going. But you've got to stick to your plan, whatever that is. If you don't have a strategic plan, if you don't know where you're going and have goals that you're trying to achieve, it doesn't matter how you pivot or where you pivot. It's just more dark to the dartboard, right? And maybe you come close to a bullseye, but if you don't have a plan, you really don't have a bullseye. So where was I going with that? I think that what you will see is that the firms outside of the AmLaw 200 that have always been able to sort of have that flexibility to adapt to their client market, or that have figured out that their niche isn't putting them against, these mega firms that got the 10-12% increase in profits last year, then they're going to be just fine. And because they know who their target audience is and they are sticking to it like nobody's business, that they're going to continue to be successful there, because those large mega firms, they don't care about those clients. And if they do, they are so far out of reach for those clients that it's not going to have an impact.
Yeah, well, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. If as we'll generically call it mid-sized firms, who you are, who your client is, how to market them, your entire strategic plan, sometimes there's even an opportunity there when you're saying, oh, well, this mid-sized firm and this mid-sized firm, or this large firm, but this mid-sized firm in our market are merging. I mean, a lot of times it works out well for firms, but we've been in the industry long enough to know that there are times that clients get squeezed in that, and they're like, I don't really like how this is going down, or like my attorney didn't make the move to that firm and they're like over here, or they use this as a moment to retire. And that's where I think some other firms where they can say, oh, we serve clients in a different way than that large law firm does, and kind of creates that opening to get your message out to maybe a new group of people who previously weren't looking for additional.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I also think what you're going to see different about law firm mergers over the next year, 2 years, 5 years is dramatically different from what we were starting to see as a trend in the 2 years prior to the pandemic, which was these mid-size regional powerhouses joining forces, because then they could become, peer firms to these very large, very profitable firms, like Lathrop Gage and I forget the firm that they merged with in the upper Midwest, or like Squire Sanders and Patton Boggs did a few years ago, or like insert your favorite regional mid-sized firm here, and in fact in the Northeast there were two of them that sort of combined forces and doing quite well with that. But I think we're going to see less of it. I think that idea that two mid-sized firms can join together and proactively and effectively compete with the growing end of the AmLaw 200 that's getting further and further away from the rest of us.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a model that's going to work post-pandemic.
Yeah, I feel like since the economic downturn, there's definitely been, of like 2007, 2008, 2009, and all of the changes that happened during that time that impacted the legal world up until the pandemic, has, to your point, gotten us to where it's definitely changed and getting harder to obtain that.
Yeah.
So related to this question, we can all think of changes we would like to see in the industry, or changes that we think should happen in the industry. But we also know that not everybody likes change. So my next question is, what is something that you think should change, but that you think will take longer than we would like it to get us to that point?
When you sent me the questions to refresh my memory for today's conversation, it was really interesting that question was part of the things to consider, because 2 nights ago, I participated in a Clubhouse meeting. Clubhouse is the new social media channel that everybody loves. And they were talking about what is about the death of the billable hour, and what's it going to take to kill the billable hour. And a whole bunch of people were talking about that. And one of the things that struck me in listening to that conversation was the moderator was talking about how she joined legal marketing in the late 90s, went to her first conference in like 99 or something like that. She said she went to a program that was presented by, I think she mentioned Andley Gibson, but maybe it was somebody else, but that she was presenting on the potential death of the billable hour. I mean, that was 22 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We're still talking about the death of the billable hour and what's it going to take to, make a transition to value-based billing and all those keywords and marketing jargon, right? I don't think we're going to make that change happen.
Ever?
I don't. And here, I think there's an inherent mistrust between client and firm that is always going to inhibit that difference. And part of it is because firm cultures and the way that compensation is structured at firms are just, it's never going to permit a firm to truly look at how they can be absolutely efficient about delivering service on a given matter, right? As long as the other piece of it is, of course, that as long as any alternative fee arrangement is based on the billable hour, it's never going away, right?
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that is that because clients always know that these alternative fees are based on the billable hour, they are inherently mistrustful of the alternative fee. Well, it must not be very good for us. They got to be making huge gobs of money if they're willing to propose that, right? And I'm not saying that's the case every single time, but there is some inherent mistrust there. And I heard it in listening to this conversation a couple nights ago. A couple people from legal ops that participated in a conversation, and some GC from one of the big tech companies. And they were all talking about the fact that they know that these alternative fees are based on the billable hour, and they don't trust them, or they recognize that it's not efficient because the one woman who was there, who actually was the founder of Clock, and her name is escaping me at the moment. So
yeah, it's escaping me too.
But she was talking about the fact that she knew it was inefficient because they audited all of their bill timekeepers at the end of the year, and there were 55 timekeepers that reported on a individual matter. There cannot be any efficiency, she argued, if it took 55 timekeepers to address one particular matter. So, you know, her argument there was there had to be some learning curve that cost them money every time a different person was on a call, or every time a different person participated in a conversation, So she was just pointing out, inconsistencies in the theory that this was efficient just based on the fact that it was a flat fee. But the other thing that bothered her, and she made a big deal about this, was that she was still getting the January letters. We need to increase our billing rates by 15% for this year, blah, blah, blah. The ones that all of our firms have given, despite people like you and me telling them, this is not the time to give that letter.
Yep.
Right. So it was just interesting. I wanted to share that anecdote about having participated in that conversation, because that's a change that the legal industry has been predicting for over 20 years that still hasn't happened yet. And I'm saying today, I'll stake my career on it, perhaps, it's never going to happen.
I'm so intrigued by that. I definitely see your point as valid. This has been something that has been discussed the entire time I've been in legal as well. And I feel like for a really long time, the conversation was like, oh, these other industries do it. And actually, kind of from my experience inside law firms, they'd be like, well, what's the website going to cost? Like, I don't want their hourly rate to create our website. I want to know what the website is going to cost, the whole thing, because I just want to pay for it by the project. And I think that there was always this thought that we were on the path to get to that point, and eventually we would get there. So I'm intrigued by the fact that you have stated we're just never going to get there. This is just how legal is going to be. And I think you may be onto something there that
the reason I think that is it's just the way we compensate attorneys is based on what they're able to generate for the firm in an hour of billing. Right. And that attorney gets X percent of that billing. And that's part of their comp structure. Whether they get it all at once as part of their draw, or they get it at the end of the year in some gigantic bonus, those details differ from firm to firm. And it's different also whether you're formulaic or you're just, you go into a meeting and everybody sort of decides this is what you deserve, whatever it is. As long as that structure is allowed to continue and is the foundation for how law firms invoice their clients, it's not possible to change it.
Well, and it's not just how they invoice their clients, it's essentially how they're judging an attorney's output. We're not
incentivizing them to be more efficient.
The age-old question that was probably one of the first things I learned when I joined legal, like, how are we incentivizing people? Because people are going to do what we incentivize them to do. And therefore, if you're asking them to do things outside of that, even the most altruistic people will eventually hit a point when they're saying, I'm being pulled in multiple directions.
Yeah.
Something has to give. And, I think basic human nature is to go with the thing that is in your best interests. And like I said, as altruistic as you want to be, sometimes that's not the right answer for your life. in your,
Yeah, well,
and,
and it's not the right answer for the
vacations.
firm either, right? Patrick Fuller, who was one of the speakers that presented at this clubhouse meeting, was talking about the fact that firms aren't organized to do what's best for the client. They're organized to do what's best for the profits for the partners.
Mhm.
And that's, I mean, that's the very nature of being a partnership.
Yeah.
They're not, as much as we want them to behave like businesses and act like corporations, they're not. They're organized as partnerships and file these registrations that make them corporations. But, you know, fundamentally, their structure is a partnership.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. I will get to the last question that we have for you, and that is, what advice would you like to share with our audience? You have been in legal marketing for, I'm not actually sure how many years, and I don't know if you want to share how many years, but you've been around the block a couple times. So
a bit, a dozen or so years in legal marketing, and almost 25 professionally overall in marketing. You know, as my trajectory has evolved from sort of the Marcom generalist specialist kind of person to more of a business development focus over the years, I think that the best advice I can offer anyone, whether you are a legal marketer trying to advance your career, whether you are an attorney trying to, you know, increase your book of business so that you get compensated better, or if, you know, you're a veteran legal marketer who's just trying to figure out what they want to do next. The best advice I have for any of those people, anyone really, is to just be authentic. I think we oftentimes see folks projecting what they think others want to see and what they want to hear and what they want to get out of us. And instead of doing what's authentic and what's real, we adopt that perception of what we think people want, and that doesn't ring authentic, and it comes across many times, because not everybody is a skilled actor or actress, it comes across as fake, and then, you know, you develop this reputation and it just becomes very difficult to overcome. Just be authentic. Be real about who you are. People will have so much more respect for you, whether they like you or they don't like you, but they will have to respect the fact that you are who you are 100% of the time.
yeah.
And I try to live by that philosophy, but I also live by this old adage from one of my favorite pop culture icons, that what other people think of me is none of my business. So if I just go about doing what I do and doing it authentically and authentically me, then I can't ask for anything more.
Yeah, and I think that's a benefit of whether it's age or experience, but
whoa.
the wisdom that comes with getting to a place in your life where you know who you are and you're okay being that person. And to your point, you also understand that while, you know, you don't want to go scorched earth and have everybody talk about what a terrible person you are, the opposite is also going to happen if you're not being authentic in your everyday interactions, where people are going to see right through it and also have negative things to say. So kind of just coming to that middle ground of, this is who I am and I show up as who I am, and people need to be okay with it.
Yeah. And if they're not, you know, maybe they're not worth, you know, being that concerned about.
Yeah, it's not the right fit for you, and it's not worth your time and your energy.
Yeah. Spend it where it's going to be appreciated, and where you're going to appreciate the back and forth.
Yep, I agree. Well, on that note, I want to thank you for your time. I loved having this conversation with you. I loved your insights. I'm really excited to have you back in the Midwest. What was Northeast? You're in Northeast, I think. What was Northeast loss is Midwest's gain, and hopefully we will all be able to meet in person, whether it's a national event, a local event, whatever, but looking forward.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to that. I can't even tell you. I got my second shot yesterday, so I'm all ready to go.
Yes, that's great. I know. I'm like, my first shot is Saturday, and then I'm all in once we get back to live programming. I'm anxiously waiting. I've been waiting for it for over a year. I like got back
Yes,
into
yes.
legal a year ago, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go see all of my legal marketing friends at these lunches and everything. And then there were no more lunches.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you,
And
Taryn.
we will look forward to doing this again some other time.
All right, thanks.